What's up, everyone? I'm Jared Harris, and you're listening to episode 62 of Beats by Jer. As always, today's episode is brought to you by Dropout Entertainment. Today, I am excited to look at an unprecedented record that 26 years later remains peerless, an album of brilliance that would change the course of modern pop, soul, R&B, and even hip-hop, while challenging the notion of Black identity within the sphere of pop music, while also asserting this artist among the greatest of all time just with a singular disc. A testament to the influence of this record could be seen through my conversation with Alexisonfires and City and Colors' Dallas Green last year when he named this album as one of his Desert Island picks. Today, we are talking about D'Angelo's Voodoo. This episode, of course, comes in the wake of D'Angelo's passing. It was announced on October 14th, 2025, that D'Angelo had passed away following a private battle with pancreatic cancer. He was 51 years old. Beyond this, however, there is a certain niche quality to Voodoo. Despite winning the Grammy for Best R&B Album in 2001, and despite appearing near the top of multiple Best of the Year lists, from the likes of the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Time Magazine, and The Village Voice, and even being listed as number 488 of Rolling Stone's 500 Best Albums just 3 years after its release in 2003, and jumping way up that list upon being updated in 2020, with Rolling Stone listing it at number 28 of 500, and perhaps more credibly with Pitchfork listing it as number 44 in the top 200 albums of the 2000s. Despite all of this, despite its platinum status, Voodoo existed then and now as a niche selection. A record that determined taste and credibility. As we'll explore later, the album sold very well, especially as a sophomore record from a then small R&B artist. However, 4 of the 5 singles failed to move the needle in a major way, and following the Voodoo tour in 2001, D'Angelo would take an infamously reclusive lifestyle in relation to his sudden rise of fame and objectification as a sex symbol, something that he was not only reluctant to accept, but conflicted with his creative process and his faith. His disappearance from the spotlight led to Voodoo becoming buried, something that attracted a sort of if you know energy to the record. It was and continues to remain a benchmark of taste. Furthermore, my interest in pursuing this episode was motivated by the lack of work dedicated to D'Angelo and Voodoo alike. Aside from a 20-minute YouTube video by Digging the Greats titled Voodoo, How D'Angelo Created a Masterpiece, and Faith A. Pennick's Voodoo as a part of Bloomsbury Publishing's 33 1/3 series, both of which greatly informed this podcast, little critical work has been dedicated to Voodoo. And of course, there is more than just those 2 resources, and I did use more than those 2 resources, but little has been done to kind of shed light to this. And similar to what was said earlier, I believe that a lot of that stems from D'Angelo's sort of fall from grace, fall from pop culture, the reclusivity of his lifestyle, kind of buried this work, again perpetuating the idea that this is, despite all its acclaim, a little bit of a hidden gem. In fact, perhaps the greatest source of information to the record is Questlove, who was a key collaborator. D'Angelo referred to him as his co-pilot during this process, but he's a key collaborator on the record, and to this day, he continues to share insight and celebrate the brilliance and greatness of D'Angelo. To fully understand the direction, sound, and methods behind Voodoo, we need to start at the beginning. D'Angelo, born Michael Archer, was the son of a preacher born in Richmond, Virginia. Him and his brother Luther would be introduced to music first by the Pentecostal church, where D'Angelo played piano. At the age of 17, he was discovered by Afro-Punk Festival founder Jocelyn Cooper, who met him and signed him to Midnight Songs, an independent imprint of Universal. After hearing a demo of IDU, the rap group that D'Angelo both performed in and produced. From here, he was introduced to a range of prolific songwriters, Raphael Sadiq, Ali Shaheed Muhammad, and Angie Stone to collaborate with. From here, all without releasing an album, D'Angelo's contract was then bought out as he joined the much bigger label EMI. D'Angelo began to make waves in 1994, first as the co-writer alongside his brother and co-producer of You Will Know, a single performed by the collaborative Black Men United collective that included Boyz II Men, R. Kelly, and Usher, and Lenny Kravitz on guitar. The song would go on to peak at number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 5 on the Billboard R&B chart. That same year, he would write and produce Overjoyed for the Boys Choir of Harlem, kind of demonstrating the juxtaposition between secular pop-driven music and gospel music, something that's deeply at play within D'Angelo's own material. From the very beginning, he was demonstrating not only a refined voice as a songwriter, but a range that could channel both contemporary pop of the day and religious gospel music. Meanwhile, as the hype continued to build among audiences and the industry, D'Angelo was working on his debut album, Brown Sugar. Now, Brown Sugar was an album not of its time. Released in 1995, Brown Sugar was the antithesis of 90s R&B. Trading in the glossy, polished, and overproduced sounds that relied on electronic textures, beats, and synths alike, and vocal styling that had less to do with traditional R&B and soul, making it much more in line with pop of the time. Brown Sugar was different. For reference, listens to Boyz II Men, R. Kelly, or the sounds that would follow in the 2000s through people like Usher and Justin Timberlake. Much like the shiny suits era of hip-hop that would take over the East Coast sound of the late 90s led by Diddy's Bad Boy Records, that sort of style and production, there was a conscious attempt for 90s R&B stars to find crossover success as bona fide pop stars. Unlike hip-hop, the bridge between R&B and pop is a much more accessible crossing, often sitting around aesthetics, marketing, and performance. Musically, it's about minimizing any previous influences that do not fit cohesively with the current state of pop. Bluntly, the key difference is that the machines that operate this industry market R&B to black audiences, whereas pop is primarily marketed towards white audiences. And when we say that, the idea of the mainstream being a representation of societal norms that are present at the time, and the idea of whitewashing audience expectations, of course, pop is for everyone. Anything musically or sonically that seems especially black is often minimized in an attempt to better fit within the accepted mainstream understanding of pop. Of course, there's more to this, and this is an oversimplification, and this argument does not explore how, due to industry standards, the ceiling for success and financial gain is often lower in R&B than pop, which serves as a motivating factor for artists to pursue this. While I have yet to dedicate a thorough enough exploration into this trend, I have discussed this further when exploring the contrasting perceptions and racial politics between Prince, Michael Jackson, and Whitney Houston in episode 22, all the way back in season 1, a lifetime ago, when exploring the musical output of Prince from 1982 to 1987. In short, and to perhaps highlight the distinction that I'm pushing here, Purple Rain, Prince obviously, is a conscious effort for crossover success, whereas Sign of the Times serves as a reclamation of a musical legacy previously shed in the pursuit of mainstream acclaim. When we talk about crossover success in the 90s compared to the 80s with Prince and Michael Jackson, this has become hyper-normalized, right? The idea of minimizing musical and cultural identities to fit accepted norms, that is even more prevalent than ever before. Crossover success, true and lasting crossover success, is very rare. While Brown Sugar is much closer to a mainstream pop record than Voodoo would ever be, there is a distinct sound to D'Angelo's debut that separates itself, intentionally so, from 90s pop. This is incredibly apparent from the gospel of Higher, the gritty swagger of the album's title track, or a song like Jones in My Bones, the sparse funk of Shit Damn Motherfucker, or Lady, the exquisite, incredible track that is Lady. Brown Sugar is often overlooked by the innovation and the brilliance that would follow from Voodoo. But not only does it stand as a strong debut, it also suggests a great level of potential that there was more to D'Angelo as both a performer and a songwriter. Truly, Brown Sugar establishes D'Angelo as an artist closer in the vein of Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Sly and the Family Stone, and Prince, while remaining highly distinctive, but especially among his contemporaries. By looking back rather than forward, D'Angelo was actually carving a new path for soul in the 90s that ran against the grain among what was popular at the time. Brown Sugar is a thoroughly enjoyable record that is culturally steeped and musically nuanced, demanding an impressive level of individualism and commitment to one's artistry, especially for a debut album. The record would debut at number 6 on the R&B charts and would peak at number 4 by February the next year. It would spend 65 weeks on the Billboard 200, peaking at number 22. 6 months later, and following the tour, the album had sold 400,000 copies. An impressive debut for sure, but not quite groundbreaking in its impact, despite being critically acclaimed by seemingly every source. Building off of what I was discussing previously regarding crossover success, D'Angelo intentionally established a distinctive sound supported by a range of African-American musical styles, soul, funk, R&B, the blues, and elements of jazz, demonstrating a conscious decision to refrain from engaging with the world of pop music. By all means, Brown Sugar is a pop record on the surface, but at its core, it remains inexplicably black. More on that later, though, of course. We further see this in both how the album was marketed and consumed by its success on the R&B charts. I have no doubt that D'Angelo made a significant mark among black listeners in 1995 while continuing to thrive on the fringes of the pop sphere. D'Angelo would tour throughout 1995 and 1996. Sales and his chart position continued to increase. The stage was set for a massive sophomore release, and then nothing. There was no album to be made. Having poured everything he had into Brown Sugar, D'Angelo went through a lengthy period of writer's block, stating, "The thing about writer's block is that you want to write so fucking bad, but the songs don't come out that way. They come from life, so you've got to live to write." Despite this, D'Angelo would remain quite active throughout the rest of the 90s through a series of covers for different soundtracks and as a regular collaborator and featured artist from a range of musicians. In 1996, there was the duet with Erykah Badu on the Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell original, Your Precious Love, for the High School High soundtrack. And a year later, he covered She's Always in My Hair by Prince for the Scream 2 soundtrack, as well as covering the Ohio Players' Heaven Must Be Like This for the Down in the Delta soundtrack in 1998. During this period, there was one original song, I Found My Smile Again, written for the Space Jam soundtrack in 1996. There's a strong, upbeat gospel feel to the sound of the song, that separates the track from the vibe of Brown Sugar, but aside from that and the winding guitar lines, it really is a guitar-led song. The song sounds as though that it was, in fact, written along with the preceding album. Between 95 and 2000, D'Angelo contributed to 15 songs as a featured artist, collaborating with Brandy, Faith Evans, A Tribe Called Quest, B.B. King, GZA, Method Man, The Roots, and most prolifically, performing a duet on Nothing Even Matters with Lauryn Hill on her seminal and widely influential debut solo album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. It was clear that with every release, the idea of a sophomore album was simultaneously closer and further than it had been before, making Voodoo highly anticipated and coveted. And while the quality of his work, both his featured contributions and his reinterpretations of other songs, was never in question, it was clear that D'Angelo was sculpting the idea of what he wanted his next record to appear as, and these were not it. Furthermore, we can look at this list of artists he covered and those he collaborated with as further evidence of the cultural foundation he was actively trying to establish and connect with, reaffirming his artistry as rooted within a greater legacy of Black identity, almost foreshadowing his hesitancy for crossover success, something that will be further established on Voodoo. Through the artists he chose to collaborate with in the songs he would cover, we could see a myriad of influences, a greater level of cultural continuity, but also an attempt to demonstrate cultural authenticity in connecting with a community of artists and their listeners while separating himself from his cohort of pop stars who actively sought crossover success. Instead, D'Angelo sought to engage with his community rather than use it as a stepping stone towards mass appeal. I often personify D'Angelo as a gifted visionary haunted by perfectionism. I have no proof of this, only my own speculation supported by the peerless quality of his work and the 5 years that would separate Brown Sugar and Voodoo, and of course the subsequent 14-year gap between Voodoo and his third and final studio album, Black Messiah. As we explore Voodoo, one thing that should be clear is the innovation behind the sound that D'Angelo pursued. Voodoo was entirely within a league of its own, and despite his hesitancy against attempts to label this sound, which of course we'll talk about later, it proved to be massively influential, but rarely ever has anyone since, with the exception of maybe Erykah Badu, come close to replicating. What's more, there is a distinct vision to the sound that D'Angelo and company were crafting, and there is not a single moment that detracts from this. The conviction to creating a cohesive body of work that aligns with a singular vision is exceptional. And again, I think it does support the idea of the quality of his work in contrast with a level of perfectionism that was holding him down. During this period, D'Angelo was still discovering his voice as an artist and songwriter, reconciling competing influences from funk, soul, jazz, the blues, pop, and hip-hop, in crafting what would become Voodoo. Here enters Questlove. It is well documented that Quest got a copy of Brown Sugar at the '95 Source Awards, and how he had previously blown D'Angelo off, thinking that upon being invited to perform on Brown Sugar, he was like, this is just going to be another 90s R&B record. I don't want to. Upon hearing the record, getting a copy in '95, being totally wrong, and, trying to find a way to, get D'Angelo's attention. He's talked about this at length on many times, how he, at a Roots show, he got D'Angelo's attention by playing an obscure drum fill from a Prince track at a Roots show at the expense of throwing his band off, and it worked. In an interview with Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell for the Broken Record podcast, Questlove calls it, that was the African communication thing. I used my drums to tell him we speak the same language. After the two got together, they embarked on what Quest calls a musical summer camp, where they set up for years at Electric Lady Studios, listening to records, jamming, and writing, starting in '95. This is the space in which Voodoo begins to take shape. In the same interview, Quest calls this a 5-year tutorial in education. When not touring with the Roots, he was in Electric Lady with D'Angelo, and when he was touring, he was scouring any and all record stores for all the rare bootlegs or limited pressings that he could find, and VHS tapes of shows from classic soul and funk artists to bring back to D'Angelo for them to study at Electric Lady. Questlove repeatedly says about this, he calls himself, in the time, I was YouTube, because he was just compiling this incredible database of old Soul Train episodes and concert footage and studio footage and all these things that were bootlegged and just existed but couldn't find, and they would covet them and they would study them. After watching these things obsessively, they would jam and they would learn to play what they had watched, and as hours would pass, a song would emerge from this. This was the process in which most of the songs from Voodoo followed. Quest even remembers at one point returning from Japan with a suitcase full of videos of Al Green, Prince, James Brown concerts, with over 50 hours of material just from that one tour. Now, the creation of Voodoo is one steeped in culture and influence. Recorded in Electric Lady Studios, D'Angelo was slowly becoming obsessed with the work of Hendrix, largely due to Questlove, but primarily engineer Russell Elvado, an influence that he once thought was overrated, but was now seeing the brilliance in his work. Similarly, he specifically sought out the studio because Stevie Wonder recorded both Music of My Mind and Talking Book there, and D'Angelo would actually record keys for Voodoo on Stevie's keyboards that he literally had to dust off. And at different points, D'Angelo also reflected in interviews to have felt the spirit of Marvin Gaye in the room, but he refused to elaborate further on that. Voodoo was very much a record created in reaction to the polished sound of 90s R&B, a sound that deeply reflected an urge for mainstream success. Furthermore, despite previously applauding Brown Sugar for standing out amongst his peers, D'Angelo actually felt that his debut was also too polished of a record. I still think that it stands apart, but he wanted to stand apart even further. He wanted to draw a deeper line in the sand that separated himself from his contemporaries. He was craving something gritty, something that felt grounded in his roots, and something like nothing else of its time. I think he was craving authenticity in music, something that the overproduction and polish of R&B had seemingly removed. The result is a grimy album that feels mysterious, tense, and challenging. At times, upon the surface, you may feel that it sounds bad, and that's because the record defies a great deal of the many standards of modern production, but it does so intentionally and so audaciously, so magnificently. Let's take the opening song, for example, Playa Playa, the first introduction to the world D'Angelo was creating. The groove is loose but incredibly tight. The bass is far behind the beat at D'Angelo's request. At his request, Pino Palladino sits far back, creating a sort of swampy feel. As Quest's drums emerge, they work counter to this, still behind the beat, but ever so slightly ahead of the bass. This is most apparent when the full beat comes in around the 40-second mark. When the snare lands, still having heard this song so many times, it sits in a spot that is a hair behind where I'm expecting it. As the horn refrain comes in just around a minute, it's like much of the arrangement snaps into place, but the bass and drums still anchor the song back. D'Angelo doubles down on this feel himself by singing closer to where they are playing the beat, and it gives the song this really interesting feel. It feels like time is moving faster in some parts and slower in others, almost as if the music is pulling the song apart in different directions. And yes, that description is entirely meaningless. What does that mean? As mentioned before, Digging the Greats did an excellent walkthrough of some of the musical elements on this record, and as said there, you can't really vocalize what feel is. You either got it or you don't. You either know it or you don't. To me, to have feel, to be able to exercise feel, let alone to this degree, is often the foundational element of whether I believe an artist has taste or not. There is some music that is so devoid of feel, but, technically excellent in so many other ways. Voodoo is a record 100% based around feel, based around groove, based around rhythm. There are exceptional melodies, there are exceptional harmonies. The way that different genres and styles intersect with one another is incredible. But the album is all about the feel of the songs. And I think you'll agree that when you listen to it, the feel is immaculate. Anyways, feel isn't quite something that you can define. As Brandon Shaw from Digging the Greats tries to explain the feel in this track, he says that it's like they've taken the idea of sitting in the pocket and have widened it so that there's more space to play the beat. Note, this does not mean play it slower. Before hearing his description, I would have argued that each beat is a spectrum where you can play right in the middle or immediately on beat, or you can anticipate and play slightly earlier but still on time, or you can let it hang, positioning yourself behind the beat. If neither of these things make this clearer, listen to the song with these in mind, and I think you'll hear it. Shaw also goes the extra mile in quantizing the song, and immediately all the magic is gone. I think he describes it as like putting the record in through the wash, and all the grit, everything that made it special has faded away. It just demonstrates how powerful the feel can be. Charlie Hunter, who played guitar and bass on a few tracks on the record, reflected that this approach to rhythm has its roots in Cuban music, highlighting D'Angelo's musical vision as one deeply connected with Afro and Latin heritage. Playa Playa set the tone for the album with its rhythmic interplay, lack of a hook, and vocals that sit in the back of the instrumentation. This is not a glossy record. All that you would expect from a sophomore artist, someone that has to prove it all, prove that they're better than their debut, prove that what they did once was not lightning in a bottle, but prove that they could do it again and better. Everything on Playa Playa goes contrary to this. It's an exceptional song. It's an exceptional performance. It's a masterclass in feel and rhythm in every regard. But this is not how you open a record as someone trying to establish themselves as a pop star, proving the idea that it was never D'Angelo's goal. That was never the mission when he set out to make Voodoo, and I think Playa Playa perfectly serves this idea. It's messy, but it's intentional, and much like the musicians in the studio, it is D'Angelo challenging the listener to follow him through his artistic vision. And while we're talking about feel, this is a good time to introduce the ongoing influence of J Dilla, one of the most visionary and influential hip-hop producers of all time. Dilla pioneered what is called Dilla time, the idea of making a beat, taking a sample, whatever, quantizing everything except for the drums. And then using a drum machine, adding in the drums behind the beat, giving this sort of stumbling drunk effect. This was unheard of then. It became signature to his sound, and it continues to influence modern rap productions alongside appearing in a lot of jazz fusion, funk, and neo-soul of the last 10 years, I'd say. Now, Dilla is not actually credited on the album, but he was involved heavily as a Soulquarian, TBD on that very shortly. Furthermore, Questlove has spoken extensively as to how Dilla blew him away for the first time he heard his beats behind the early work of The Far Side, and has inspired his own approach to rhythm, particularly in his kick patterns. Now, it's unclear how involved Dilla was behind the scenes of Voodoo, as all the songs that he had made for the record, along with another wealth of material, were never finished, right? Again, the process for Voodoo was a 5-year process of loose jams, hangs, and songwriting, A lot of songs were made and were finished. A lot of songs were made and were never finished, and it's questionable to what degree they were completed or how D'Angelo, as a suspected perfectionist, felt. However, the way the band plays with rhythm, it is clear that this is a direct response to the work and production of Jay Dilla, who was present for quite a bit of time during the making of Voodoo. The timing, the feel behind Voodoo does not exist without Jay Dilla. Now, what makes this special is that this is the first time that we are seeing Dilla time being played by an actual band on instruments. Questlove actually had to relearn how to play drums to meet the needs of the record, saying in a complimentary way, "I've never seen anyone so disrespectful to the rules of rhythm and melody structure as D'Angelo." Now, the sound of the record, as unique as it was further influenced by the collective or community that was the Soulquarians. D'Angelo and Questlove were bound together for a love of what they called sickness, funky analog sounds in a time where computers and digital processes were becoming normal. To that end, Voodoo was recorded entirely using live instruments, entirely on tape, and with engineer Russell Alvado estimating that 85% of the record was recorded live off the floor, which is an absolutely astounding feat when you consider the musicianship, the refined yet seemingly improvised approach behind all the parts, and the overall jam vibe behind some of the tracks. Live off the floor is not easy, especially when the songs are so loose as this is, and when everyone is sitting at different points on the spectrum of the beat. Imagine locking in with a band that tight, but also that far apart from each other, and recording that live off the floor. It's insane. Back to the Soulquarians. Questlove regrouped the roots at Electric Lady, so that way he can continue working with his band, but also continue working with D'Angelo. As he and D'Angelo embarked on their summer camp experience, more and more people started showing up. People that were interested in the music they were making, people that were interested in the music that they were listening to, and people interested in the idea of curating old school soul, funk, jazz, all of that in an increasingly analog industry. We're talking about people like Raphael Sadiq, Q-Tip of A Tribe Called Quest, DJ Premier, Method Man of the Wu-Tang Clan, Redman, Common, and Erykah Badu, alongside James Poisner and Jay Dilla. This unofficial collective was drawn together for the love and inspiration of authentic soul and funk music, seeking to reflect these influences within modern soul, pop, and hip-hop. The creative energy ebbed and flowed from studio to studio, room to room, as people popped in and out of each other's sessions, with the 3 studios at Electric Lady occupied by D'Angelo, of course making Voodoo, Erykah Badu as she recorded Mama's Gun, and Common as he recorded Like Water for Chocolate. 3 seminal albums, all recorded during the same period by this free-flowing collective of musicians bound together by a similar vision. The collaboration and competition that was felt in this created a real sense of community, extending the African American cultural foundation to the forefront of all of these records. Each brilliant artistic statements on their own and exceptional extensions of Black genres that had faded from the mainstream. D'Angelo, Questlove, Dilla, and Poisner would go on to craft and shape records for Jill Scott, The Roots, Bilal, Talib Kweli, and Slum Village, extending the legacy of the Soulquarians beyond the founding 3 records. Soulquarian, being more of a mindset and approach to creation, became synonymous with the dirty funk, traditional soul, and grounded sound of these records. For more on the Soulquarians, perhaps music's greatest supergroup that was never actually a supergroup, but rather a community within a passing moment of time, Pitchfork did a great video walkthrough on them on YouTube titled The Soulquarians, the collaboration between Erykah Badu, Questlove, D'Angelo, and more. An example of the Soulquarian influence of the overarching community can be seen on Chicken Grease, a song that was actually originally written for Common. D'Angelo heard the song and demanded that it appear on Voodoo, seeing the potential the song had for him. The song feels the most jam-like and really does reflect what you could imagine the jams that D'Angelo, Questlove, and whoever else were around would engage in. Those hour-long, those lengthy jams after watching an old Prince bootleg. The title Chicken Grease also comes from Prince, because Prince would say play a chicken grease chord, and that would be that sort of like 16th note, really like staccato rhythmic chord, and he would jam on those chords. He'd tell his guitar player play a chicken grease chord, and they'd do that, and then he would build from there. Again, kind of reflecting the idea of a jam. There's this excellent rhythmic and melodic counterpoint between the bass and the kick drum, and the counter melody between the guitar and the bass guitar. Vocally, this is also D'Angelo at his quietest, almost adding more vocal percussive layer to the song rather than a leading melody. But to me, it really does reflect the best jams that D'Angelo and Questlove engaged in for those 5 years. However, the same could be said for the sudden, funky, and jazz fusion-inspired outro to One Mo Gin. That seemingly comes out of nowhere, almost as if it was a previous jam that had the tape running, and they cut that tape and they just pasted it onto the end of the actual song. It really does just come out of nowhere like a separate song. It makes me wonder if that upbeat pattern at the end, followed by the second cut of the slower one, if those were some of the unfinished songs behind Voodoo, or if that was just them leaving the tape running as they jammed. But again, it feels like those jams that Quest and D'Angelo were engaged in for years. Another example of the Soulquarian effect is Left and Right, the most hip-hop song on the record, led by contributing verses from Method Man and Redman, who were invited into the studio following an underwhelming performance from Q-Tip, specifically because Quest wanted them to bring a more street appeal sense to the album. This is dirty funk colliding with 90s rap. It's aggressive, it's abrupt. It's one of my favorite songs on the record. And again, just listen to that snare. It pops so nicely, and it's just a hair behind where you're expecting. Now, D'Angelo is the lead performer and songwriter, but Voodoo shines for its collaborators. First, and most obviously, is Questlove, who gives the performance of a lifetime, something that forever established him in line with the likes of, say, Steve Jordan for the greatest feel playing. This is, to me, one of my favorite records for the drums alone, and is something that I'm regularly going back to, and I think stands as one of Quest's greatest performances. Pino Palladino also deserves flowers for his incredible work, not only here, but just in general. He is one of the most versatile session bassists out there. If you have a radio, you've heard Pino Palladino. Who else could perform like this with D'Angelo and perform beside blues people like B.B. King and John Mayer, and perform for contemporary pop artists like Adele and Lady Gaga, but also like do an incredible job partnering with Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails? His list of credits is insane. And while the Voodoo credits are without a doubt stacked, everyone is there for a reason, and everyone does such a fantastic job. There's one other gem that I need to highlight, and that is jazz guitarist Charlie Hunter, who only makes 3 appearances on the record, and I would argue 3 of the best songs: The Root, Spanish Joint, and Great Day in the Morning, Booty. This guy is a virtuoso in his own right. and incredibly underrated, incredibly unknown, um, criminally so. um, on these songs, he performed on an 8-stringed guitar, tuned so that he could play bass and guitar at the same time, simultaneously, entirely on the same guitar at the same time. And when you listen to those songs, you can kind of hear it. You're like, okay, yeah, like the bass and the guitar, they kind of like have this counterplay going. When you listen to the root, it is impossible to separate the two. In 2024, Hunter sat down with Vertex Effects to display just this, and it's insane. They did this incredible video on YouTube. Charlie Hunter breaks down his most iconic guitar parts. It's incredible. The tone he's getting on the guitar is amazing, but like how he's playing the bass and guitar parts on Spanish Joint and how he's playing the bass and guitar simultaneously on the root is exceptional. The dude is an absolute wizard, and after seeing this, you'll understand just why he was asked to step in and fill the shoes of Pino Palladino. All of that is to say that the album's star was supported by an incredibly talented cast of artists willing to challenge themselves to fit within the desired sound of the album. D'Angelo himself remains a brilliant songwriter and a gifted vocalist. His approach to vocals remains meticulous. Questlove stated that from 96 to 98, a core of the music was done, and late 97 into 98 and 99 was all vocals. Listening to the album, the vocals are uniquely recorded and at times incredibly stacked with an untold amount of harmonies upon harmonies upon harmonies. At times, the voice never gets too big, but you can hear a choir of notes, and it's all D'Angelo stacking these and playing with his inflection and his dynamics. Voodoo demonstrates a great level of range and power behind D'Angelo's voice, the kind of voice that could be compared to that of, say, Prince or Marvin. However, D'Angelo chooses to reserve that for key moments and instead vocalizes in a more stylized way. In her book, Faith A. Pennick quotes Alicia Lola Jones, a professor of ethnomusicology at Indiana University, and referred to D'Angelo's often very quiet, sometimes mumbled vocals, and how the mix also doesn't prioritize the vocals over the instrumentation. Jones calls this a vocalized textural embedding, and this is probably best heard in Chicken Grease. Jones described the practice as part of an African-derived aesthetic that has since appeared in jazz, gospel, R&B, and even dubstep. By preserving this cultural connection, D'Angelo is actively turning his back to the sleek, mainstream, and direct approach taken by 90s R&B and pop stars. Again, there is no vocal hook. You're not supposed to sing along with D'Angelo 100% of the time. There is no focus on delivering a catchy vocal hook. The focus is entirely on the band as a whole, including D'Angelo. Cultural connection aside, D'Angelo uses his voice like an instrument, embedding himself within the band, adding melodies, harmonies, and like a rhythmic percussion. It's a very unique use of vocals, especially from a pop artist. As a leading voice, however, D'Angelo leaves nothing on the table, ensuring that it is known that he is, in fact, a student of Prince. When he wants the vocals to shine, they absolutely shine. And I would argue that front to back, Voodoo stands as one of the greatest vocal performances across any record. Listening to the opening harmonies of The Line, and how his dynamics shift with pitch and inflection, it's a masterclass on how to use your voice. Or rather, listen to the climactic swells at the end of entitled How Does It Feel? And listen to how the ad-libbed vocal wails surrounding the harmonies of the main refrain. And tell me those aren't the most Prince-inspired vocals you've heard on a record that wasn't actually by Prince. Voodoo is a masterclass, a perfect album, according to both Rick Rubin and John Mayer. Pitchfork even gave the record an elusive 10 in 2012 in a retrospective review. From the Latin rhythms of Spanish Joint, the gospel balladry of Entitled, the down-tempo funk of The Root, and the up-tempo funk of Booty. It's incredible. Furthermore, Send It On features an interpolation of Kool and the Gang's Sea of Tranquility. An interpolation is like sampling a song, but rather than sampling it, you play it yourself. And the band also plays a cover of Roberta Flack's Feel Like Making Love. Again, curating a range of influences that do not cater to a whitewashed understanding of pop music. What is curious is what does not make the album. Jay Dilla, upon the album's release, was frustrated to find out that none of his songs had actually been completed. And according to Pennick, 50 songs had been recorded in the 5 years behind Voodoo. Among these was, in fact, a collaboration with Lauryn Hill, as well as a cover of Fela Kuti's Water No Get Enemy. This trove of songs further supports the idea of authentic vision behind Voodoo. D'Angelo easily could have released Voodoo 2, 3, 4, and 5, but abstained from such, demonstrating artistic conviction, demonstrating the desire to keep Voodoo as a special singular disc, and demonstrating the value of his artistry and the value of moving on in whatever direction that may be. And while it would take 14 years, Black Messiah is an incredibly different album from Voodoo. These are not the same records. And again, given how successful Voodoo was upon its release, it would have been so easy to finish off the remaining tracks or to take what was already completed and just drop them. But there is no attempt at doing that. There is no, there's nothing like that. And again, I think that speaks to the integrity at the heart of D'Angelo's artistry. Upon its release on January 25th, 2000, Voodoo was met with unanimous praise and a range of near-perfect to perfect reviews. It would go on to win the Grammy for Best R&B Performance the next year. The album was ranked among the top of numerous albums of the year type lists and remains a frequent contender on such lists that attempt to rank the best albums of the 2000s and even of all time. In its first week, the album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, not the R&B charts, but the Billboard 200, selling 320,000 copies. Within its first 2 months, it would sell over 500,000 copies and would remain on the charts for 33 consecutive weeks and has gone on to achieve platinum status since. All of this was done on the strength of Voodoo as a complete album, front to back, as D'Angelo intended it. None of the record's singles, save one, not Devil's Pie, not Left and Right, not Send It On, and not Feel Like Making Love, made significant dents on the radio or the charts. The songs were often deemed to be too black for mainstream radio, and most R&B stations were centered around legacy music, or they were deterred by the influence of hip-hop in this music. It wasn't pure soul. It wasn't pure R&B. Nor did it fit in with what modern R&B was. Forget about pop music. It didn't fit with D'Angelo's contemporaries. It was never meant to. Therefore, the singles that were released in the lead up and post Voodoo release had a challenging time finding a place on radio. They did not do well, except for one single released roughly a month before on January 1st, 2000, untitled How Does It Feel? This song made massive waves on MTV for its use of close-ups and slow pans across D'Angelo's seemingly naked and chiseled body. The video was a smash hit, and like most of the music on Voodoo, It did not seek to objectify women lyrically or visually, but instead supported the old school soul aesthetic. This emerged at a time where female objectification was very commonplace within R&B, hip hop, and pop. And aside from how D'Angelo looked, the contrast of how this video used his body compared to the uncountable stream of female bodies used by male artists spoke further and set him aside from his contemporaries again, leading to the success of Voodoo. By rejecting the male gaze, which was and perhaps remains central in the music video format, D'Angelo made a memorable video that directly spoke to women. It's an undeniable video. It's obviously eye-catching, right? There was a reason that they used this video, and D'Angelo was on board with it. The director was on board with it. His management team was on board with it. I don't think they quite realized how big it would blow up. They knew it would make waves, though, and it did. Throughout the year, Untitled was highly in demand on both MTV and BET. Pennick, however, in her book, highlights that just as Voodoo is steeped in African American culture, we too must observe this video, a video where D'Angelo chooses to make an object of his body through the lens of American history, stating, "In an American society that commodifies the naked body for its sexual currency and commodifies black bodies throughout centuries of actual currency, D'Angelo lost control of the video's seemingly romantic and innocuous narrative." The video serves as a genuine marketing tool, and a successful one at that. And again, we cannot ignore that while consensual, D'Angelo used his body as a means of selling his record, and while it did make him a successful artist, it also in turn made a lot of executives even more money, further highlighting the tension not only between artists and labels, but post-colonial institutions that profit off the talent, culture, and bodies of Black Americans. With the Untitled video and Voodoo, D'Angelo achieved crossover status, which I think should speak to the power of raw authenticity and the musicality behind the record. D'Angelo did everything he could to double down on his African American identity and still broke through to the #1 spot. It's impressive. With the Untitled video and the Voodoo artwork, D'Angelo became something of a sex symbol, which helped sell tickets for the tour, but left him feeling disheartened when audience reactions for the removal of his shirt exceeded that of the music. Genuinely, I believe that D'Angelo wanted to find success in music, but I think he was immediately uncomfortable with this, especially given his how he felt it interacted with his creative process and the value of his art, but also his religious upbringing and his own faith. Paired with the perceived perfectionism discussed earlier, this led to a rocky decade of arrests, substance abuse, and overall reclusivity. He would not release his third record for another 14 years. Further speaking to this reluctancy, D'Angelo crafted a sound that had previously not existed in the forefront of popular music until Voodoo. Like grunge before it, there was a race among labels to capitalize on this, calling it neo-soul, which, as titles go, is an accurate approach that acknowledges a heritage of music that came before while also distinguishing it from pop and R&B. D'Angelo, however, did not agree. In 2014, he stated, "I never claimed I do neo-soul. When I first came out, I said I do black music." We can see that any attempts to label, along with his rise to fame, comes into conflict with what he believes to be his creative process. To confine Voodoo to neo-soul is to put boundaries to what is and what isn't, almost and as an attempt of defining elements of Black identity and what can and can't be done in the future. This statement is central to understanding the sound that D'Angelo was going for on Voodoo, seeing an absence of authentic Black voices that celebrated Black culture, music, and identity in pursuit of crossover, whitewash pop success. D'Angelo sought to create a statement so against the grain and so remarkably Black that you could never question his authenticity. In doing so, he created his opus. Voodoo established D'Angelo as one of the greatest of all time. With just a single record, how many artists get to that status if they stopped at their second album? Not Stevie Wonder, not Prince, not Michael Jackson, not John Coltrane or Miles Davis? Would we still revere the Beatles if they stopped at With the Beatles? What about Led Zeppelin? Would a reunion be so pined for if they never made it to Zeppelin 4? While all of these artists listed had incredible debut and sophomore albums, few artists achieved this level of artistic integrity that D'Angelo did by his second record. And yes, he would go on to release Black Messiah, another exceptional release, but 2 albums out of the gate, and he achieved this legacy as one of the greatest songwriters and performers of our time. This is an album I wish I could go and hear for the first time again. I love this album. I would say it's one of my favorite albums. I think this record is phenomenal, but it's so jarring. It's so different. It's so obscure, and it's so unlike anything else that I think that there is so much excitement in hearing it for the first time and following that path. And despite it being familiar, I don't think it's lost that excitement, but to hear Voodoo for the first time again, wow. Rick Rubin calls it a perfect album. Admiring it in that interview with Malcolm Gladwell and Questlove for the Broken Record podcast, he states, "The same thing that alienated people that didn't like it is what drew me to it. I'm listening to something that I don't have a point of reference for, and that's really exciting. I'm looking for those experiences. It wasn't weird for the sake of being weird. It wasn't different to show, oh, we could do something so different. It was different because it was cool as fuck to be different." If Brown Sugar was not of its time, Voodoo was not of this earth. Despite all that has been said in the acclaim D'Angelo was met upon the release, upon his return, and again in his passing, Voodoo feels like a lost treasure. An album that, much like how I assume it was in 2000, remains a gem and a benchmark of taste. It still carries that if you know type vibe. With his passing, I wanted to explore the social and musical significance of Voodoo as a way of turning more people onto one of the most brilliant and innovative singular creative statements ever made. Most importantly, Voodoo asserted that there is, in fact, a place for authentic cultural voices within popular music. D'Angelo demonstrated that Black culture, narratives, perspectives, and history matter, and that Black identity did not and does not need to be curated to perpetuate already accepted images of what it is to be Black within the mainstream. Through this, Voodoo, much like its composition and recording, goes entirely against the grain and challenges accepted norms surrounding what it means to be Black within pop music. Truly, D'Angelo was a once-in-a-lifetime artist, and Voodoo is his undeniable masterpiece of both musical artistry and cultural assertion. Thank you for checking out my exploration of D'Angelo's Voodoo. Join me in 2 weeks on April 27th as I do a deep dive on one of the most bootlegged albums ever, a record of mythical status, an album that you still to this day, despite it being officially released on vinyl decades after it was initially pulled from shelves, cannot be heard on streaming services. In 2 weeks, I am talking about the Black Album by Prince. I'm Jared Harris, and this is Beats by Jer.